The G20 summit in Johannesburg, the first to be held on the African continent, has now officially come to a close. South Korea is set to assume the rotating G20 presidency in 2028. After high-level talks between the United States and Ukraine in Geneva, Washington says a tremendous amount of progress has been made in talks to finalize a peace deal to end the war. Kyiv also called the talks positive, saying there are signs the Trump team is listening. New satellite images reportedly show North Korea is continuing to modernize and expand its Yongbyon nuclear complex, the regime's main source of plutonium and enriched uranium. Hello and thanks for joining us on Arirang News. We begin today in South Africa, where this year's G20 summit has now come to a close. On the final day of the multilateral gathering, President Lee Jae-myung laid out his vision for artificial intelligence and stable supply chains. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Critical minerals and AI were the overarching themes during the third and final session of the G20 summit in South Africa. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung was among the world leaders to share his visions with the theme of a fair and just future for all, starting off by welcoming the G20's announcement of the AI for Africa initiative.
특히 금년 APEC 의장국으로서 이런 정신을 반영한 APEC AI 이니셔티브가 아태 지역을 넘어 전 세계로 확산될 수 있도록 노력하겠습니다.
With the world facing increasing uncertainties over critical minerals amid the U.S.-China rivalry, President Lee also called for the need to establish a stable supply chain. He noted this year's G20 critical minerals framework and South Korea's role as the chair of the Minerals Security Partnership.
앞으로도 고해적인 공급망 구축을 위한 국제적 노력을 계속 해 나갈 것입니다.
He went on to say that those efforts should be translated into benefiting all, particularly young people and women, as he noted Korea's contribution when it comes to building AI digital learning centers for the vulnerable. This year's G20 summit was unusual in more than one way. It was the first to be held in Africa, and the group of 20 leaders adopted a declaration on the first day of the summit, not the last, stressing the importance of multilateralism. Some of the world leaders were absent, including U.S. President Donald Trump. With this, the first round of the G20 rotating presidency was completed. South Korea will take over the rotating presidency in 2028.
막중한 책임감으로 G20가 국제 경제 협력을 위한 최상위 포럼으로 그 위상을 더욱 공고히 할 수 있도록 주어진 역할을 충실하게 이행하겠습니다.
President Lee now heads to Turkey, the final leg of his four-nation trip to the Middle East and Africa, for a summit with his Turkish counterpart. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Johannesburg.
And staying in Johannesburg, President Lee Jae-myung has pledged to improve the overseas voting system for Korean nationals living in South Africa. During a luncheon with some 70 Korean residents on Sunday, President Lee Jae-myung acknowledged that some residents have had to travel as much as 1,400 kilometers to cast their ballots due to the lack of nearby polling stations. To address the issue, he proposed introducing an electronic voting system for overseas Koreans. Now, this was the first meeting of its kind between a South Korean president and the Korean community in South Africa since the two countries established diplomatic relations in 1992. And as President Lee Jae-myung heads to Ankara, Arirang News spoke with Turkey's ambassador to South Korea to hear his hopes and expectations for bilateral ties going ahead. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
South Korea and Turkey's centuries-old brotherhood is now powering major partnerships in future industries as President Lee Jae-myung begins his visit to Ankara. Turkey's ambassador to South Korea, Murat Tamer, says the visit marks a turning point, grounded in a relationship deeper than most bilateral ties.
Because it will be a first visit of the Korean president, I believe, after 16 or some years. And Turkey and Korea, as you know, we consider each other as blood brothers. And we have many things in common. We have share a joint past history, and there's many things we can do together, like two like-minded countries and the two ends of this continent of Asia.
The ambassador says with the meeting of the two leaders, he hopes to see concrete advances in energy, defence and economic cooperation.
Based on the Korea-Turkey FTA, our bilateral trade has now reached $11 billion. And how do you hope to see economic cooperation go forward?
I have to tell you that our economics are not alternative to each other. Turkey and Korea, our economies are complementary to each other. So we can work together in many fields. One of them is the nuclear project, that it will be what I always say, that it will be the jewel of the crown of Turkish-Korean relations, because one Korean minister told me that the nuclear project is a friendship for 100 years. Well, we've been friends for Korea for 1,500 years. No reason to add 100 years more. Why not? It will be cooperation for many fields, from the construction sector to the chemicals to the services. It will just open up many business opportunities on win-win basis for both of our countries.
Ankara is positioning itself as a strategic gateway for Korean firms seeking access to other large markets.
First of all, Turkey is in the position of its proximity. It's very near to Balkans, Europe, Gulf countries, Central Asia. For example, about 4 or 5 hours flight, you can reach just about 800 million people within the reach. So it's a very good hub for the Korean companies. Secondly, Turkey and the European Union, we have a customs union agreement. So anything produces in Turkey can be sent to Europe without any custom duties.
Defence cooperation is also expanding. Ankara is producing the Turkish version of Korea's K9 Thunder howitzer and developing its own main battle tank using components derived from the K2 platform. The ambassador says the next step is drones, an area where Turkey is now a global leader.
Turkey has the 65% of the world drone market now. So we like our Korean brothers to have that capability. Of course, when you think about drone, you always think about military means, but drones are also used for the civilians, for the forest fires, for the search and rescue operations.
Collaboration comes naturally to the two brother nations, which he said can create marvels.
As you mentioned, Korea and Turkey sit on the opposite ends of Eurasia, but during your 3 years here, how have you been bringing these strategic interests together?
First of all, what Korea taught me is the distance is not that important, as long as you have the same feeling, same heart. And when I come to Korea, I didn't realize that how the Korean people feel about Turkey. And I devoted myself to further deepen increasing our already existing bilateral relations in the field of economics, in the field of culture, in the field of political relations and commerce as well. Yes, we had some challenges, but we did a lot also in this 3 years period.
The two countries share a rare sense of togetherness, also reflected in their cooperation through MICTA, the five-nation middle power grouping of Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey and Australia. But shared values and solidarity between Korea and Turkey date back centuries.
People think that Turkish-Korean relations start in 1950s in Korean War. Well, actually, it's not the whole truth. Our relations started about 1,500 years ago when we lived side by side in the near Mongolia and China. So when Turkish soldiers came to Korea in 1950s, they did not come to the total different land or the different people. They just come to aid to their friends they know 1,500 years ago.
With high expectations for President Yi's visit, Tamer says he hopes to see both sides further building on one of Eurasia's oldest and most enduring friendships. Arirang News.
Shifting gears, tensions between China and Japan are escalating beyond bilateral politics, spilling onto major international stages, including the United Nations, the IAEA, and now the G20 summit. The fallout began after Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi suggested earlier this month that Tokyo could exercise collective self-defense in the event of an escalated conflict between Taiwan and China. Our Pyongyang reports.
On Friday at the UN, China's ambassador sent a formal letter to Secretary General Antonio Guterres, accusing Prime Minister Takaichi of openly challenging China's sovereignty. That same day, at the International Atomic Energy Agency, Beijing warned that Japan was revisiting its non-nuclear principles. And at a Security Council reform debate several days earlier, China argued that Japan was unfit for permanent membership. China's diplomatic pressure is also extending to the G20 summit in South Africa, where the Japanese and Chinese premiers stood only a few seats apart during the group photo but did not acknowledge each other. Beijing had already signaled it would not agree to a bilateral meeting unless Takaichi retracted her remarks on Taiwan. At the same time, China is working to rally international support, stressing South Africa's backing during Chinese Premier Li Qiang's bilateral talks, and securing statements opposing Taiwanese independence during China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi's Central Asia tour. In an interview afterward, Wang accused Japan of crossing a red line, warning that if Tokyo continues down the wrong path, the world has the right to oppose any resurgence of militarism. Beijing has paired its diplomatic offensive with economic pressure in recent days, including travel and study advisories, halting Japanese film screenings, and resuspending Japanese seafood imports. Meanwhile, Japan is reinforcing its defense posture along its southwestern islands, with the defense minister visiting key bases this week, including those closest to Taiwan. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Washington says it has made major progress toward crafting a plan to end the war in Ukraine, following high-level talks in Geneva on Sunday. Kyiv also called the Sunday's talks productive, hoping for a fair peace deal. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The United States says it has made significant progress toward crafting a plan to end the war in Ukraine, following high-level talks in Geneva on Sunday. Washington says momentum is building, even as several sensitive issues remain unresolved. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio led the American delegation in negotiations with senior Ukrainian officials as both sides work to refine a peace proposal first outlined by President Donald Trump. The talks took place amid concerns in Kyiv and across Europe about parts of the U.S.-backed draft, which some allies view as offering major concessions to Russia. Rubio said negotiators had narrowed down outstanding issues within a 28-point draft plan, calling the progress substantial.
We arrived here today with one goal, and the goal was to take, is 28 points or 26 points, depending on which version as it continued to evolve, and try to narrow the ones that were open items. And we have achieved that today in a very substantial way. Now,
he said technical experts from both sides are now working to finalize remaining provisions and that the document could form the basis for a final settlement. Rubio acknowledged, however, that critical questions still need agreement, including the future roles of NATO and the European Union and how to ensure lasting security guarantees for Ukraine. He stressed that none of these issues are impossible to resolve and voiced confidence that the gap between the sides can be closed. Washington hopes a breakthrough can be reached soon. Rubio said the Trump administration aims to finalize an agreement by Thursday. Ukraine gave a similar assessment. Presidential Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak called the first meeting with the American delegation highly productive, saying both sides are working toward a fair and lasting peace. He added that Kyiv will coordinate with European partners in the days ahead and emphasized that the ultimate decision will rest with both presidents. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said it is positive that Ukraine is engaged in direct dialogue with the U.S. delegation and that there are signs the Trump team is listening.
It is important that we do talk to the Americans, and we are getting signals that President Trump's team is hearing us.
With talks set to continue, Zelensky said Monday will be a busy day as Ukraine continues to defend its interests. 이승재, Arirang News.
In other news, a new report says North Korea has continued to modernize and expand its main nuclear complex throughout this year. According to U.S.-based monitoring website 38 North on Sunday, satellite images from October and November show continued construction across the Yongbyon nuclear complex, the regime's main source of plutonium and enriched uranium. The group reports heightened activity at a suspected enrichment site northeast of the radiochemical lab, including the completion of 2 support buildings, new concrete paving, and installation of 6 possible heat exchangers to cool centrifuges inside the main building. The report added that the improvements all serve to help fulfill Kim Jong-un's call for exponential growth of his nuclear weapons arsenal. And on the economic front, the number of Seoul residents in their 30s who own their own homes dropped to a record low in 2024. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics, more than 527,000 people in their 30s in Seoul were not homeowners, while only 1 in 4 people in that age group own their homes. Experts say the drop reflects a trend of couples getting married later, a rise in the number of people living alone, and limited supply. And due to soaring house prices, many young adults are finding it increasingly difficult to take their first step into Seoul's housing market.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In the United States, New York City Mayor-elect Zoran Mamdani reaffirmed that he still believes President Donald Trump is a fascist, just 2 days after a surprisingly cordial meeting at the White House. In an interview aired on NBC News on Sunday, Mamdani said, quote, "Everything I have said in the past I continue to believe," adding that he would not shy away from political disagreements. The comment came even though both men had pledged to cooperate on housing and cost of living issues during their meeting last week. Trump, who previously called Mamdani a communist lunatic, said he didn't mind the label and emphasized that he wants New York to do very well. Senior White House officials also said the administration plans to work with Mamdani despite clear policy differences. In Lebanon, Hezbollah has confirmed that its top military commander, Haitham Ali Tabtabai, was killed in a high-impact strike on Beirut by Israel on Sunday in its first attack on the Lebanese capital in months. Hezbollah said Israel's killing of its chief of staff had crossed a red line. According to Lebanon's health ministry, at least 5 people were killed and 28 wounded after the strike hit an apartment building in Beirut's densely populated Dahieh district. Israel says the operation targeted a senior figure rebuilding the group's military capabilities. The strike comes despite a ceasefire brokered by the U.S. and France in November of last year. In Nigeria, 50 of the 315 students kidnapped from St. Mary's School in Niger State on Friday have escaped and have been reunited with their families. However, a military-led search and rescue operation is continuing for the remaining 265 students and 12 teachers taken when gunmen stormed the school. The latest abduction case prompted Niger State to close all schools in the area. A similar kidnapping in Kebbi State last Monday has raised fears of targeted school hunting by armed groups. Nigeria has been dealing with a kidnapping crisis since 2014, with more than 2,500 students taken. In the United States, the new film Wicked for Good delivered a record-breaking opening on the weekend, earning $150 million domestically and $226 million worldwide. The sequel far outpaced the first Wicked film, which opened with $114 million last year and became the second highest domestic opener of 2025, behind a Minecraft movie. Industry analysts say the performance sets a new record for fantasy adventure sequels and signals a strong rebound for the U.S. box office after a slow October. Jihan, Arirang News.
The last work week of November starts with much warmer air across much of Korea. But rain early this week will bring temperatures to the more seasonal side. And until this afternoon, central regions could see about 5 millimeters of light precipitation. Chungcheongdo provinces could see less than 1 millimeter. Meanwhile, nationwide rain is expected for tomorrow, which should help to ease the dryness on the east coast. And this afternoon, Seoul gets up to 17 degrees Celsius. Gwangju will be topping out at 19 degrees. Busan, Jeju at 20 degrees. Meanwhile, most of the central regions will be dealing with unhealthy fine dust levels for most of the day, and the air quality will worsen further south later in the day. After the rain moves away, many places will drop below freezing on Thursday. Then we're expecting Nuri rocket on Thursday. However, the nationwide rain is expected on the same day, though there might be some changes to that outlook.
That's all we have for today's noon edition of Arirang News. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Stay tuned.